Peyton Allen Lowell Geraw was born on January 10, 2013 at Fletcher Allen Healthcare in Burlington, Vermont. His mother, Natasha Marie LaForce, had her boyfriend, Joshua Geraw, sign Peyton's birth certificate, even though he wasn't the biological father. The identity of Peyton's real father remains unknown. Peyton was a sweet baby with light brown hair, dark eyes, and chubby cheeks. He loved wearing baseball-style hats and bright, spring-colored clothing. He was called a dream baby and was always smiling and happy. But baby Peyton had a tough start in life. He was born 5 weeks premature and was exposed to methadone. His mother later admitted to using heroin during the first half of her pregnancy and methadone during the second half.
Natasha was born in 1986 to parents Craig and Patricia LaForce. They divorced when she was just 5 years old, and both parents remarried a few years later. As a young adult, Natasha got in trouble with the law. In 2005, she got into an argument with a friend of her former boyfriend. According to court documents, she stabbed the man in the neck with a knife. She served more than 2 years in prison for that incident and was still on parole at the time of our story. By the time Peyton was born, Natasha was living in homeless shelters and motels, relying on welfare to get by. Her romantic partners were often violent and struggled with addiction. In early 2013, when Peyton was still very young, she and Joshua took Peyton to New Hampshire. However, leaving the state without permission was against the terms of her parole for the stabbing charge. On top of that, Joshua was also on parole for unlawful trespass, unlawful mischief, petty larceny, and burglary. They were both arrested on May 29, 2013, and Peyton was placed with his maternal grandmother, who was Natasha's mother. Both Natasha and Joshua were sent to jail following their arrest in New Hampshire, but by July of 2013, Natasha was out of jail. The Vermont DCF, Department of Children and Families, returned Peyton to her custody. She was living at the Lund Family Center. This is a residential treatment program. At this time, she seemed to be making progress to improve her life. She did well in parenting courses, but said they weren't helpful to her. DCF closed the case, though social workers checked on Peyton through January of 2014. DCF had returned Peyton to Natasha, but she showed little interest in his medical care, and DCF had to push her to keep up with his vaccinations. Once she left the halfway house, she appeared to fall back into harmful patterns again. In January of 2014, she moved into an apartment on Mallets Bay Avenue in Winooski, Vermont. The following month, she began a relationship with Tyler Shequin. Tyler had his own criminal history. He had served time for assault and robbery with a weapon, simple assault, prohibited sexual acts, and disorderly conduct.
On April 2, 2014, Natasha and Tyler brought Peyton to Fletcher Allen Healthcare. They said he'd stopped walking and was vomiting. His doctor noticed 2 bruises on Peyton's neck, one on each side. They were circular, about 1 to 1.5 centimeters large, and in an uncommon place to get bruising. The couple couldn't give a good explanation for them. Shockingly, the medical staff failed to notice the actual reason he had stopped walking. He had a broken leg. Now, despite his injuries, Peyton was released into the custody of his mother. However, the hospital did file a report with DCF. Investigators later obtained a text message from Natasha that read, "The hospital called DCF about those bruises on his neck and are coming to my fucking house tomorrow at 1 p.m. So I don't want to look like I don't have much food and stuff." She wrote this to Tyler's sister, according to court documents.
2 days later, on April 4th, Vermont DCF investigator John Salter visited the home twice. Investigator Salter, who was a 25-year DCF veteran, held a supervisory position, but he happened to be doing field work that day. The first time that Investigator Salter visited, Peyton was said to be sleeping. The second visit was also inconclusive. Natasha briefly showed him the bruising, but the room was dimly lit. Investigator Salter never actually touched Peyton. Later, Investigator Salter told police, "Do I know that he was still alive? No, I don't." Minutes after Investigator Salter left, Natasha called 911 to report that her baby wasn't breathing. Peyton was rushed to Fletcher Allen Hospital in Burlington, Vermont, where he was pronounced dead. He was just 14 months and 25 days old.
So, what happened to baby Peyton? Now, according to the autopsy findings, he showed signs of shaken baby syndrome. He had multiple injuries to the top of his head, a forehead injury, neck injuries, damage to the retinal nerves in both of his eyes, and brain bleeding. He also had a lower fractured leg. Now, according to court documents, at the time Peighton died, Natasha was receiving opiate addiction treatment at the Howard Center. She also had the habit of secretly bringing some of her buprenorphine home for Tyler. Now, buprenorphine is a prescription medication commonly used to treat opioid use disorder. Within days of Peighton's death, both Natasha and Tyler ended up in jail on unrelated parole violations. According to court records, Natasha's parole was revoked after she tested positive for coke and weed, and Tyler's furlough was revoked for testing positive for the buprenorphine.
By May, investigators had classified Peighton's death as a homicide, and they soon focused on the circumstances surrounding his death. Both Natasha and Tyler denied knowing how Peighton died. Tyler claimed he loved Peighton, yet he had suspicious bruises around his own eye and neck. His explanations changed. First, he said he had been injured while working out. Then he said Natasha elbowed him by accident. Police interviewed Tyler multiple times. Eventually, he admitted that he witnessed Natasha shake Peighton and slam his head on the floor about an hour before DCF worker investigator Salter arrived. He said that Natasha seemed to be under the influence of a new drug during the time this happened.
Former boyfriend of the Winooski woman charged with murdering her son admits he lied to police. Good evening, everyone. I'm Stephanie Gorin. George is off tonight. 28-year-old Tyler Shequin pleaded guilty to charges of giving false information to a police officer in connection with the death of 14-month-old Peighton Geraw. Shequin is the former boyfriend of Geraw's biological mother, Natasha LaForce. LaForce has pleaded not guilty to Peighton's murder. WPTZ's Bridget Shanahan was in court all day and joins us now live with more. Bridget.
Well, that's right, Steph. In court today, Tyler Shequin admitted he didn't tell police what he says really happened the day Peighton died until weeks into the investigation. He told law enforcement officers last month that he saw his former girlfriend, Natasha LaForce, violently shaking the toddler just hours before his death. And now the prosecution says he'll be their key witness in the murder trial against LaForce.
I'm happy that, he now spoke up, but I wish that he would have did it on, the day he was asked instead of, 3-4 interviews of still lying.
Tyler Shequin's mother and sister sat quietly behind him while he admitted in open court he knowingly withheld information from police.
Guilty.
14-month-old Peighton Geraw died on April 4th. But police say it wasn't until May that Shequin would tell the whole story about what he says happened the day Peighton died.
He said clearly and demonstrated that he saw Natasha LaForce violently shake Peighton Geraw and slammed Peighton Geraw's head against the floor in the house. That account was corroborated by the medical examiner as the likely cause of death.
According to the affidavit, Shequin spoke to officers 4 times, but it wasn't until he was polygraphed in the 3rd and 4th interviews that he began to reveal the details about Natasha LaForce.
Tyler had been honest about what he saw sooner. Do you think Peighton might still be alive?
I can't answer that question at this time. I mean, clearly, because of Mr. Shequin's earlier statements to the police, this investigation was delayed and it was deflected from Miss LaForce.
He was such a good baby. Yeah.
This has been really hard for your family.
Yeah, really hard. He was the best baby ever.
And while Shequin prepares to be the prosecution's primary witness in the murder trial against his former girlfriend, his family is still healing.
And it's still hard, and it'll probably still be hard for probably the rest of my life,
Tyler recounted that just before investigator Salter arrived, he stepped out of the shower and saw Natasha shaking Peighton and slamming him to the floor, apparently frustrated by the baby's crying. According to Tyler's account, Natasha said, "He wouldn't shut the f*** up." Tyler said he replied, "He's a f***ing baby. What do you mean?" Tyler said he pulled Natasha off the baby, held him for a moment, and then put him back in his crib. He told investigators, "I could tell he had life in him and he was breathing, so I put him in his crib."
police investigated both Tyler and Natasha. Tyler passed a polygraph test, but Natasha failed hers. Natasha tried to claim that Tyler caused Peyton's injuries, said that Peyton and Tyler didn't like each other. Now, we're talking about a 14-month-old boy here, but with each person blaming the other, the case was murky. However, prosecutors ultimately charged Natasha with second-degree murder. On May 28, 2014, Peyton's mother was arraigned for second-degree murder in Chittenden Superior Court. She pled not guilty and was held without bail. She faced up to 20 years in prison if convicted.
All right.
Good morning. Please have a seat. This is a matter of case of Natasha LaForce. This is docket 1824-5. And Mr. Thomas, I'll in your office to represent Ms. LaForce.
Thank you, Your Honor. We received the information in an affidavit, waived reading of the charges and the Rule 5 rights, waived the 24-hour rule, and her plea today of not guilty.
Okay, we'll enter the plea of not guilty. And Mr. Dudman, I see the state's filed a motion to hold without bail.
That's correct, Your Honor. We ask that the court grant our motion and that the court set a hearing on the state's motion to hold.
You wish to comment on that now, Mr. Collins?
My preference would be for the court to make a provisional ruling and wait for the actual attorney to file a bail review, but I'll leave that to the court.
Based on the standards set by the Supreme Court on review of the probable cause affidavit, I do believe that there is sufficient evidence to indicate that the evidence of guilt is great and to justify the order to hold without bail. So I will issue the order that she be held without bail, and then I won't set a hearing until there's a request from her attorney.
Thank you.
Way you can do it.
Yes.
Judge, I believe the state can make that request to have a hearing, and we've asked that the hearing be set. I think we're entitled to it under the statute.
I'm not sure. So I'll have to take a look to see whether the court will set for a hearing unless there's a request by the defendant.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All rise, please.
With limited forensic evidence and both suspects pointing fingers at each other, the prosecution's case had its weaknesses. Eventually, in October of 2016, Natasha reached a plea deal with prosecutors. She pled no contest to manslaughter and child cruelty charges. Under this plea deal, Natasha LaForce was sentenced to serve a minimum of 6 years in prison and a maximum of 15 years, with credit for time served since 2014. She was also placed on probation until October of 2036, with conditions restricting unsupervised contact with children under 10 and requiring substance use treatment. Natasha was released in May of 2020 before the completion of her minimum sentence due to pandemic-related concerns. She is still a free woman to this day. Meanwhile, Tyler pled guilty to a false information charge. He admitted to waiting weeks into the investigation before telling police what he knew. According to court documents, he spoke with investigators 4 times, but it wasn't until the 3rd and 4th interviews that he started telling the truth about his former girlfriend. He said he had never seen her this crazy and violent before, adding, she was definitely on something, and it wasn't just weed, as well as, it was like she wasn't there. As part of his plea deal, he was released from prison. He had been incarcerated on unrelated charges for a parole violation. He was also set to be the state's key witness and agreed to refrain from any contact with Natasha. However, he didn't have to testify against her because she reached a plea agreement of her own.
Peyton's funeral was held on April 12, 2014, with a memorial service in Burlington. The family encouraged mourners to wear baseball-style caps and spring-colored clothing in honor of Peyton's love for them. Cassandra Blondin and several other family friends set up a vigil for Peyton that took place on May 25, 2014. In Burlington's Battery Park, dozens of supporters lit paper lanterns in Peyton's honor and watched them float into the sky. Cassandra said, "We hope he's looking down and this makes him happy. We don't want another child to go through this." Jonathan Hinton, who was Peyton's godfather, said, "I think some changes need to be made in DCF." He added, "I'm heartbroken, but it's nice to see people turn out to say goodbye." "I miss you, little buddy," he added, saying, "I love you." If you look up Peyton on findagrave.com, you'll notice that there are 2 entries. one lists his last name as LaForce and the other as Geraw. The first states he was buried at the Mallett's Bay Cemetery in Colchester, Vermont. The second says that he was cremated. We're not sure what the truth is here. It could be both.
Peighton's tragic death raised serious questions about Vermont's Department of Children and Families and the systems in place to protect vulnerable children. Some blame the hospital for failing to identify Peighton's broken leg and for releasing him back into his mother's care. Others pointed to the missed warning signs within the child welfare system that could have saved the 14-month-old boy's life. In the aftermath, Governor Peter Shumlin called for reforms, and an internal investigation examined whether DCF caseworker, investigator John Salter, could have done more in this situation. But ultimately, the Chittenden County State's Attorney's Office determined investigator Salter would not face criminal charges for his involvement in Peighton's case. This is quite usual when we see cases such as this. Investigator Salter had visited Peighton's home just minutes before the boy's mother called 911 to report that he was not breathing. Investigators concluded that he had followed DCF protocols, which at the time did not require a hands-on examination. Even though some questioned whether Peighton might have already been dead during the visit, authorities found insufficient evidence to prove criminal neglect. At a news conference, State's Attorney TJ Donovan said, "John Salter performed his duties. He did everything that he was trained to do. He did everything that he was supposed to do. He followed those protocols that DCF has." However, Peighton's death cast a spotlight on those very protocols in place, particularly the absence of any requirement for social workers to conduct physical checks to confirm a child's well-being. These are required in many other states in America. Given that injuries can be subtle or hidden, and lighting or crying might not always indicate distress, Donovan suggested revisiting the policy and potentially mandating brief physical examinations during visits. A 27-page Vermont State Police investigation detailed Peighton's background and DCF's extensive role in his life. Born prematurely and drug exposed, he was initially placed in protective custody before returning to his mother, which was under supervision at the Lund Family Center. Despite some progress in parenting programs, his mother's struggles remained a source of concern for everyone involved. Just days before Peighton's death, hospital staff reported bruises, but under DCF standards at the time, they did not amount to documented physical abuse. In defending investigator John Salter's professionalism, DCF Deputy Commissioner Cindy Walcott acknowledged how harrowing the situation had been for everyone involved and recognized the need to re-examine policies in light of rising opioid abuse and increasingly complex family challenges. Though no charges were officially brought against investigator John Salter, officials underscored the importance of ensuring that DCF policies fully protect children, especially in high-risk circumstances. Peighton's death was the second in a series of tragedies that placed Vermont's DCF under intense scrutiny. In February of 2014, 2-year-old Desiree Sheldon, another child known to DCF, was killed by her stepfather. These back-to-back incidents led to multiple investigations, a call for the department's restructuring, and the addition of more staff. Responding to these cases, the Vermont legislature examined the state's child protection laws, passing significant reforms in June of 2015. The new legislation shifted the state's priority from reuniting families to focusing on children's well-being. Lawmakers also approved funding to hire additional social workers and administrative personnel, aiming to strengthen oversight and improve outcomes for vulnerable children in dangerous family environments.
Peighton's short life and tragic end became a catalyst for change within Vermont's child welfare system. His death underscored the need for clear protocols, hands-on assessments, and better coordination between medical professionals and social services. While his loss cannot be undone, the policy reforms enacted in the wake of his passing continue to reshape how state agencies respond to and seek to prevent future cases of child endangerment.